coming in. And when a person experiences that, and you can experience it for a lot of reasons, but when you experience it, for instance, you might be reading, and you'll get to the bottom of the page, and you won't know how you got there. You won't remember what you read, even though your eyes were seeing it, and so forth. And you also have what I call a working memory dump. So what was in your memory is now gone. So now you've got to go back and reorient yourself a couple pages ago, even though it only lasted this brief moment.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. And then you have another way of showing what the functioning looks like. And there's this colorful map here, which I thought is a really cool way, because this side is not so good and this side is good.
Much better.
So describe the two sides. So the not so good side with all the blue.
Well, let's go back. We're looking for a couple of things. We're looking for activation in locations, and that's really about size of brain waves. So what we just saw is someone whose brain waves suddenly got huge. It's also possible to have overactivation, and that way, under those circumstances, the brain waves are just too small, and you can't get at your brain. You can't get at those parts, even though they're going. It's like they're going a mile a minute, and you can't get at it. So that's one of the parameters we look at, and then the other parameter we look at is we're looking at coordination across cortex. Cortex is this layer that covers the rest of the brain, and it's all wrinkled up so it can fit, and it's the biggest on us humans, and it's about the most advanced of our functioning, and it's also about control. So what we're looking at is we're looking at how well do each of the locations that we tap coordinate and co-vary with each of the others. And on the left-hand map here, what we're seeing is a lot of dark blue, and dark blue is not enough coordination. So this is a person that's challenged with various things, and again, it depends a lot on location of where this lack of coordination is. And then on the right-hand side, we're seeing what this person's brain looked like from a coordination perspective after a lot of sessions of neurofeedback.
So the lighter colors are showing more coordination, that green and the kind of yellowy green.
Exactly.
More coordination.
Exactly. And this is the same person we saw before who actually had a seizure disorder. So for us to have gotten this person's brain to function this much better with no medication, and given the severity of the seizure that this person was experiencing, the seizure episodes, was very exciting.
And so now we have this other slide that shows 3 different states. We've got these red lines, blue lines, and this other thing going on the bottom.
Little stuff on the bottom, yeah. The little stuff on the bottom actually looks very small because these other brain waves are so enormous. This is a little boy who is on the autistic spectrum, PDD-NOS actually, and what we see is the red is represents the brain waves when we did his first EEG, before his first brain map, before we did any training. And he's got like 240 microvolts of this slow wave going on, 2 to 6, which is enormous. And what it means
when it should really be is what?
Oh, it should be way down around 25, 30.
And it's 240, wow,
yeah,
that's quite a difference.
It's ginormous, absolutely ginormous. So our job was to teach the brain to make this smaller and also get that coordination going. And so what you can see if you look at the blue is, although he's not down to totally normal for his age, the change is enormous. I mean, he's, at this point, it's, what is that? That's about 60 microvolts
versus
as
240.
Compared to 240. So what happened for this particular child is he had a lot of trouble with transitions and various of the kind of things that you would expect for someone on the spectrum, and he ended up moving to the other coast and handling it beautifully.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And so people come for things like autistic spectrum issues, ADD, ADHD. Tell me some of the other things that this kind of therapy helps.
Brain injury.
What happens because of the brain injury?
Actually, they can often look like ADD. That's very, very common. And it's very common for people to come in who say they have ADD, and what the story is, the way they got it, could be a brain injury. It could be what I call a birth story. It is very, very common that a child with ADD will have a birth story where something was funky about the birth.
They didn't want to come out and they were forced out.
That it could be
No,
that.
I'm kidding.
I mean, it could be too long a birth. It could be too short a birth. It could be meconium in the fetal waters. It could be a moment of hypoxia.
What do those things mean to someone uneducated like me?
Basically, it's stress on the infant. That's really what it's about. It's stress on the fetus. And when you have stress on the fetus, this is a very important moment. I mean, birth is a very, very important moment. And in fact, if you want a little bit of psychotrivia, the measure most highly correlated with success in adulthood is APGAR. So the better you come out,
APGAR?
APGAR. That's the number. They actually give a newborn a number anywhere from 0 to 10 a minute after birth, and I think it's 5 minutes after birth. And the better your number, so the closer to 10 or 10 that you have, then the better you were, so to speak, the healthier you were at the moment of birth. And that's most highly correlated with success in adulthood.
Wow.
So what we often see, although sometimes APGARs are just fine, we often see that there was a prolonged birth which put stress on the infant. Too fast can sometimes be just as bad. There are various things that can happen that tell me, okay, this is a birth story. And the good news is how much we can do for a child who's got a birth story. And it really is just another variation, in a sense, of head injury, in that there's a disruption in that very important moment, and that disruption can affect the brain. It doesn't always, but it can. And what we want to do is we want to maximize a person's brain functioning.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you haven't quite said yet, which I was really thrilled about, is that neurofeedback has as good results, if not better, than a lot of medication.
Absolutely.
Now, why would you want to put a child on medication? I mean, like Risperdal does horrible things to children, like on little boys, it makes them grow breasts when they don't need them. I have to remember to not hit my microphone. You know, it makes people get foggy. It totally changes their quality of life. And here's this thing that's totally non-invasive, it's drug-free, it's safe, and the results that had been documented in a number of cases for ADHD and other problems are at least as good, if not better. So, I mean, that to me was a major draw, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you tell the world about this, because I think it's so super.
Well, there's a new study out of NIH, actually. It's a multi-site study that they did, and it was a 3-year study. And the first year, they concluded, based on the data that they got, is that they were looking at psychostimulants, Ritalin and that sort of thing, Adderall, and they said, this is great, this improves attention and focus, this improves behavior, and there's absolutely no side effects, fantastic. So this affected number of prescriptions throughout the world. By year 3, the conclusions had changed. What they found is by year 3, there were no longer any improvements.
From the drugs?
From the drugs. And there were problems with growth, both in terms of height and weight. So this is an NIH study.
So that they weren't growing as tall as they should.
They weren't growing as tall as they should, and so forth. And yet we have studies, several studies that have been done in my field that compare psychostimulants with neurofeedback, and what we see is significant improvements with both, but they work just as well.
Right.
They work just as well.
Why take meds that could have side effects? When there aren't any side effects here, or, you know, so incredibly minimal, it's negligible.
And I think one of the things that fascinates me, I've been doing this for almost 15 years, is the longer I do it, the more I see how very efficient our culture is getting at disrupting frontal lobe function. Frontal lobe function is all about executive functioning. It's about attention, it's about focus, it's about switching from one thing to the other, it's about memory. This is not a good thing, and so we really focus on frontal lobe function, and frontal lobe function is also about behavior, impulsivity, and social competence. And
so if you strengthen the frontal lobe, if I could say it in plain English,
the front part of the brain,
then what you do is you give people a lot more options for their behavior.
Absolutely.
As well as ability for all kinds of things. So, for example, I can remember coming to visit, and there was a kid there who was working on retraining his brain for sports performance.
Yep. Yes.
How did you figure that out?
Well, actually, that's what I love to ask kids about, because you have to get the kid to buy in. Let's face it. So if a child has a sport, then it's really easy for me, because all you need in a sport to do better is a little bit more focus and a little bit better physical coordination. And we're able to do that. And another thing we're able to do, interestingly enough, depending on what we see on that EEG, that brain map, is often, we're seeing more and more of this, problems with the functioning of the eyes. Not the visual acuity, not is it fuzzy or not fuzzy, but the functioning of the eyes. Do the eyes work together? Are they able to accommodate so you can see far away and then close and make that change quickly enough? Can the lens adjust quickly enough? That sort of thing. We can see that on our EEGs,
if that's
and
off,
we can improve that.
If that's off, how would one know it? Like, what would they be experiencing?
That can very much be part of dyslexia. We see that a lot in reading problems. So reading problems can be, interestingly enough, in this area, which is about language. It also can be in this area, which is about vision, and it can be most dramatic and most challenging if it's in both of these areas. So and you have that combination.
And this neurofeedback
can enhance that, can improve that.
Well,
also, we see visual problems in attention and focus. How are you going to attend if you're not seeing well? Basically, vision trumps everything in the brain. So most of our mental resources, I call it mental money, is going to go towards vision. So if your brain's putting a lot of mental money into vision because the system isn't working easily, then you're not going to have enough mental money to put into those frontal lobes that are all about executive functioning.
And when you say executive functioning, in English, what does that mean?
Again, it's
I'm
about
be a leader in my company.
Initiation, as in starting things. It's about inhibiting, which is stopping things. So it's about inhibiting those impulses, so it cuts down on that impulsivity. It's about switching from one thought to another, one activity to another. People get stuck in one and then they can't switch. So they get sort of this compulsive style, or they get a very rigid style. Memory is a very, very important part of executive functioning. Organization, knowing where your stuff is, making sure you bring your stuff home that you need. Organizing your thoughts, organizing what you're going to write, what you're going to say, holding it in memory while you say it. This is all executive functioning.
That's awesome. And this has even worked for people who are getting into those years when memory is not... Wait, where did I put my keys?
Normative, what's it called?
There we go.
Yeah, I can't remember. Normative cognitive decline of aging is what it is called. So it's considered the norm in this culture. And it doesn't have to be the norm.
Right.
It's very, very possible to get your memory back. I had a 70-plus-year-old gentleman who had been a very high-powered executive, started his own business, etc. And he used to like to play piano at odd hours and learn new sonatas, and he couldn't memorize them anymore. He just couldn't do it. So he came in for that. So a little bit of neurofeedback, and guess what? He's memorizing sonatas again.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
And so in case people are wondering exactly how the training works, let's show those other slides that we have. And there's a picture of a patient with this,